Tonight, Victorians advised to wear face masks after the state's single biggest spike in coronavirus cases.
It may get worse before it gets better, but we've got a plan and a strategy, and if we all work together and if we all work hard, then we will get to the other side of this.
Police crack down on people flouting the reimposed lockdown rules, breaking up a party at Dandenong.
That's $26,000 that birthday party's costing them. That's a heck of a birthday party to recall, and they'll remember that one for a long time.
A lifeline offered to Melbourne businesses, hit hard by a second closure. And the little Victorian town leading its own recovery from the bushfires.
Mallacoota is a little bit rebellious, but it's also very independent.
Good evening, James Hancock with ABC News. For the first time, 5 million Victorians in the state's lockdown zone have been urged to wear face masks where physical distancing isn't possible. The new health advice coincides with Australia's biggest spike yet in coronavirus cases, with another 288 added today. Just 26 have been linked to known outbreaks. 262 are still under investigation. It comes off the back of the biggest ever day of testing, with more than 37,000 tests conducted yesterday. The number of Victorians in hospital has also jumped to 47. 12 are in intensive care. In an effort to again flatten the curve, millions of single-use and reusable masks will be distributed for places like public transport, taxis and shopping centres. But some Victorians are continuing to flout the stay-at-home orders. In one breach, 16 partygoers were fined $26,000 overnight. The state's chief health officer has warned it will take up to a fortnight to see the results of the current lockdown. In the meantime, it's feared the case tally will climb even higher. Ben Knight begins our coverage.
There's no sugarcoating a rise like this.
Certainly 288 new cases today is a pretty ugly number.
There are now more than 1,100 active cases across Victoria and hotspots in Melbourne's northwest corridor, especially in the suburbs of Craigieburn, Roxburgh Park and Truganina, which are still showing high rates of community transmission.
Those suburbs, people really need to have an awareness that if they've got symptoms, this may well be coronavirus. You should not be seeing other people.
So I know and understand there'll be concern across the community to see that number. It was always going to get worse before it got better.
But the massive spike in daily cases has led to a significant change in health advice. After months of being told wearing masks wasn't necessary, Melburnians are now being advised they should wear them when outside and unable to maintain physical distance, such as on public transport or when shopping, but not in schools. And they should get used to the idea.
If you can wear a mask where you can't distance, that's exactly what we would like you to do.
2 million reusable masks are now being made for distribution in the community. The advice on wearing them won't be enforced, but police are ramping up their offensive against people who break the existing rules. Police have issued 60 infringements in the past 24 hours, including a couple from Docklands who tried to breach 2 roadblocks on their way to Phillip Island, and 16 people at a birthday party in Dandenong after a tip-off that a KFC had taken a big order in the early hours of morning.
That's $26,000 that birthday party's costing them. That's a heck of a birthday party to recall.
As for gatherings like this,
whale watching down Mornington Way, totally unacceptable, total breach of the distancing rules.
I'm free!
For residents of the towers that have been locked down for almost a week, today was their first chance to venture outside.
I love those bird sounds. God, that's what I love about being outside.
Oh, just to get outside's a relief.
And with a wet weekend ahead, the Premier is urging Melburnians to stay indoors.
This is not a normal weekend. It really isn't. And I just appeal to everybody to play their part.
And to get used to it. Ben Knight, ABC News.
Victoria's unemployment rate is tipped to reach 11% because of the second lockdown. The state's economy could also dip by 14%. Across Melbourne, businesses are once again feeling the pinch. The state government has moved to help out, offering more than $500 million in assistance. Here's state political reporter Richard Willingham.
Closing the doors for now.
This time around, just mentally, it's just too hard for us.
There are simply not enough people around in the city for Nick Dumas to keep his cafe open.
You can't just keep serving no one.
It's a similar tale across the CBD, where empty offices and empty streets mean empty cash registers. Once again, the state is stepping in with a $500 million support package.
This is us saying we're here with you all the way through what will be a very traumatic, a very distressing and a very difficult time for all Victorians.
The package includes $5,000 grants, $26 million for mental health support, $10 million for mentoring, $40 million to help pay for regional tourism cancellations, $20 million specifically for the CBD, and a $10 million worth of payroll tax deferrals.
We anticipate that our unemployment rate is likely to peak at 11%. What are we, 6.9% now?
The hospitality sector had only just started its recovery before the second wave hit.
We could see the light at the end of the tunnel, but now I guess we're back to square one again.
An extra $30 million has been set aside for the sector. The biggest worry for publicans is the future of JobKeeper.
The cash support at the moment is important just to get through the next 6 weeks. But I think ongoing we need to see probably an increase or an extension of the JobKeeper payments.
Well, certainly people in Victoria right now are doing it much tougher than the rest of the nation, and there will be a second wave of income support that the Commonwealth will announce.
Even after recording positive cases, some businesses are staying open, including Chemist Warehouse's distribution centre in Somerton.
But not every place that has a case who happens to work there requires closure. It really does depend whether they've been infectious at work, whether they might have acquired it at work, or neither.
While today's focus was on the warm embrace for struggling businesses, the heat was on Jobs Minister Martin Pakula, whose department has been caught up in the botched hotel quarantine.
There were multiple agencies involved in the hotel quarantine arrangement, and all of that will be dealt with by Justice Cope in her inquiry.
Was your department one of them?
Yes, my department was one of them.
But right now, the focus is on saving businesses from the knife. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
And the business support package has offered some relief for regional Victorian tourism operators who've been badly hit by the loss of Melbourne visitors. But some say a targeted support package for the country is needed to help towns stay afloat.
This winery in central Victoria should be bustling with Melburnians.
Not having that metro tourism coming to regional Victoria has really hurt us. It's necessary what they've done, but it's really, really difficult.
The lockdown has also hit the Creswick Woolen Mills near Ballarat, which was already struggling without access to international tourists.
That's been a massive challenge. Now no Melbourne visitation, that's a colossal challenge.
With no visitors arriving, many regional hotels are simply shutting their doors until August. And Victoria's alpine resorts have turned off their ski lifts, putting the snow season on ice.
They were looking very forward to a great ski season, obviously. Many of those were very well booked out right through the end of July and end of August. That's all been cancelled now.
The state government support package offers $40 million for regional hotels that are struggling due to cancellations. But with no end in sight to the lockdown, some want a specific package for regional tourism.
No one should imagine that this is the last business support, that this is some conclusion to the support that we will be providing.
The Accommodation Association says regional Victorian businesses will lose as much as $350 million over the next 6 weeks. Tourism operators are now pinning their hopes on their last remaining market, regional Victorian holidaymakers.
Get out. Ultimately, you can still get out. You can still do things.
It's a good excuse for people in the regions to explore their own backyard. Amelia Terzon, ABC News, Ballarat.
Australians trying to get home from overseas are about to find it much harder. The last 3 operating international airports are halving the number of people they accept to just 600 a day between them. If passengers do get a seat, they'll pay for their own fortnight in hotel quarantine as soon as they arrive. Here's National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett.
For us, it feels like Mother India doesn't want us to go.
Her teaching visa runs out in a few days, but Deb Tellis from Newcastle's already feeling totally banged up in Bangalore.
It has been extremely stressful the last 4 weeks trying to get out of the country.
Tickets out cost more than $2,000. Government evacuation flights, when they happen, are massively overbooked.
Just plead with the Australian government to help us get out of here.
She'll find no joy in Canberra.
We'll be in a restricted capacity for the foreseeable future.
Because Scott Morrison's agreed to requests from the states to throttle back further on flights for returning Australians. For the last month, an average 7,000 passengers arrived at the borders each week. Now the total will be capped at around 4,000 a week, shared unevenly by states with international airports, except Victoria, which is closed completely. States are bailing out of their exposure to the 2-week hotel quarantining regime, both on the numbers they're prepared to accommodate and the funding they provide. Every one of them will enforce a traveller pays rule.
Where possible, we'll seek to have some sort of national uniformity across those pricings.
There's no doubt hotel quarantining has helped protect the country from imported cases of coronavirus, but it's been anything but flawless, which is why National Cabinet's appointed retired senior bureaucrat Jane Holton to review the lot of it, from the training of staff to rules on testing and the care of young, sick and elderly passengers who've been subjected to it. Greg Jennett, ABC News, Canberra.
Well, it hasn't been a great week for coronavirus in Australia, and it has some infectious disease experts asking, is our strategy the right one? ABC analyst Casey Briggs looks at some of the latest evidence.
At the start of this pandemic, we didn't know which strategy would give us the best result. We still don't. Different countries approach the problem in different ways, and some that saw early success have taken a turn for the worse. And the global experience has shown how opening up the country again is akin to walking a precarious tightrope. We're now seeing the consequences in Melbourne of when you fall off.
The virus's natural inclination is to grow, and the virus is naturally a sociopath.
Sweden took a very different approach to much of the rest of the world, avoiding enforced lockdowns. For now, at least, the country has one of the highest per capita death rates in the world.
The findings is the high death toll among the people in the long-term care facilities that we really wish we could have done something about.
These are Victoria's cases. They only started to surge back into the double digits less than a month ago, leading to the situation Melbourne is now in. Compare that with Israel, a country that had employed similar strategies to suppress the virus and now has a similar shaped curve. This week, the country closed a swathe of businesses indefinitely, but its leaders don't want to move to a complete lockdown while unemployment runs at 20%. Some experts think pursuing suppression is futile because it will likely lead to a cycle of lockdowns repeating.
When it takes off like it has in the public housing, in the hotspot areas, then you've got to reintroduce lockdown. It's more difficult emotionally to cope with, and it's very difficult economically.
New Zealand presents one alternative. It pursued a more aggressive strategy than Australia. Eradicate the virus domestically and then keep the borders closed while returning to almost normal life.
Going hard and going early gave us the very best chance of stamping out the virus.
But will that work forever? And can our Kiwi neighbours be sure the virus is actually gone? We just don't know.
Mallacoota made international headlines when the skies turned red and thousands fled to the beach to shelter from the summer bushfires. The little town, with a strong independent streak, is leading its own recovery, bypassing local government. Jess Davis has the story.
Mallacoota in far east Victoria is a long way from anywhere and has a history of going it alone.
Mallacoota is a little bit rebellious, but it's also very independent. Really isolated community.
More than 100 homes were destroyed here, as well as large swathes of bushland, farms and infrastructure. Local government would typically coordinate the recovery, but this community is bypassing it in the hope of rebuilding sooner.
The process was to set up an incorporated body. It would give everyone a level playing field, but it would also be transparent and it would be financially audited.
The association now has nearly 800 members in this 1,000-person town. Steve Pascoe started a similar initiative after the Black Saturday fires, which all but wiped out his hometown of Strathewen.
And we all knew that if we waited for government to do it for us, then it would take too long, it'd probably be the wrong thing, and it wouldn't do us any good.
Mallacoota's committee will apply for recovery grants and determine how the money is distributed. It'll prioritise community infrastructure, as well as those who lost homes.
It's really difficult watching everything that you know and love just kind of being vaporised right before your eyes.
Bryce Watts-Parker lost his family home. He's joined the recovery committee and says it's been good to feel useful.
You can have people all over Australia telling you how it's done, but fundamentally it's the people in the community and the people on the ground that guide how that recovery happens.
A town willing to work together to move on. Jess Davis, ABC News, Mallacoota.
Five Australian journalists face an uncertain future in Malaysia after documenting the struggles of migrant workers there. The team from Al Jazeera were questioned by police in Kuala Lumpur after politicians accused them of tarnishing Malaysia's image. Now they've been threatened with sedition charges. Here's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts.
An uncertain wait in a cramped police station. Australian journalist Drew Ambrose and his team spent weeks documenting Malaysia's crackdown on migrant workers during the coronavirus pandemic.
When you look at these raids, you can't help but think, is this the practical reality of dealing with a pandemic? Or is it racism?
Their story revealed how illegal migrants were rounded up in detention centres despite the threat posed by the virus.
It's only when the trucks leave that you realise what's going on.
They are not murderers. They are not criminal. They are just undocumented.
It drew a furious response in Malaysia. The journalists were peppered with death threats online. Enraged politicians and officials called the documentary misleading.
I've got my ID.
Now the Attorney General is contemplating hitting them with sedition charges.
No camera. We will check with the AG first. The AG will decide whether there is any case, then if they need to be charged.
Catapulting the team of 6, 5 of whom are Australian, into their own headlines.
Several Al Jazeera staff have been questioned by police in Kuala Lumpur.
Australian officials are offering consular support while the international broadcaster is backing its staff. Charging journalists for doing their job is not the action of a democracy that values free speech, Al Jazeera said. Journalism is not a crime. If the journalists are charged, they could face the prospect of jail time. That would create many more international headlines and a diplomatic headache for the Morrison government. Australian officials will be working hard to resolve this quietly behind the scenes. Stephen Jedgetts, ABC News, Canberra.
A ruling by the United States Supreme Court has paved the way for President Donald Trump's tax records to be publicly released, though it may not be before the November election. Mr Trump is the first US president to withhold his financial records in almost 50 years. He lashed out at the ruling, describing himself as the victim of a political prosecution.
I'm not satisfied because, frankly, this is a political witch hunt, the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. It's a pure witch hunt. It's a hoax.
In another move opposed by the president, city officials joined Black Lives Matter activists to emblazon their message in front of Trump Tower in Manhattan. Isolation has been top of the mental health agenda this year, with many Australians making big sacrifices during the pandemic. But it's an issue remote cattle stations have been grappling with for decades. Eric Barker travelled to Woodstock Station in Queensland's Gulf Country, where developing strong mental health is a major focus.
The day starts early on remote Woodstock Station.
where business and pleasure mix in the dawn light. Jade Lord moved to the area from Brisbane 8 years ago and brought yoga with her.
I didn't realise the health and the mental benefits that it was actually giving me until I was missing it.
Sensing others in the vast region were craving the same outlet,
Good morning, ladies.
the mother of two started online classes for the bush, and business is booming.
Even the actual physical yoga practice, it's the space and it's the conversation that is actually created when we're all together.
Building a strong sense of community is also important for the station, with about 20 employees living several hours from the nearest town.
I did a number of years working out on stations before I came home, and I know the best of them were the places where you always felt like you were really part of the family.
Most of the workers rely on social media to keep in touch with friends and family.
You know, a lot of these fellas are here, they love the work, they love the environment, love the people, but everybody still has a heart which might be connected to somewhere else, and I think being able to keep in touch with that is pretty important.
But staying connected can be tricky when you're this remote. Hundreds of kilometres from the nearest town, there's no mobile phone coverage and the internet comes from a satellite. And while there have been improvements in these services over the years, the connection is still a long way behind the cities. Sick of the dropouts, one local grazier built his own internet.
First of all, we hooked up our station, but then the neighbours said to us, oh, we wouldn't mind being able to do that too, and it grew from there.
It now covers more than 20,000 square kilometres and softens the challenges of living in the bush. But not for the Lord family, who live outside its footprint.
We just roll with the punches and we just work with it and do the best we can.
Eric Barker, ABC News, Richmond.
And this week, the ABC has been sharing tips and information supporting your mental health and wellbeing. Go to our website for more. And if you or someone you know is experiencing distress, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or the Kids Helpline with these details on the screen. To finance now, global share markets have tumbled as coronavirus fears intensify. The concerns also undermined commodity prices, which added to domestic market pressures. Here's Philip Lasker.
There's not much joy to take us into the weekend. Surging coronavirus cases across the US raised fears of another lockdown in several states. So most major markets weakened, even red-hot Shanghai. Not much heat here. Today's fall capping off a pretty poor week. Softer commodity prices hurt miners, particularly energy shares, and Sydney Airport is a victim of the intensifying restrictions. No one thinks Victoria's problems will derail the national recovery underway right now, at least not yet. Most analysts have downgraded their growth forecasts, but there are a lot of moving parts. How long will the lockdown last? Will other states suffer similar fates? Here's a clear and timely indication of what's happening in Victoria. The orange line shows dining and takeaway spending collapsed in Melbourne's 10 hotspot postcodes, much worse than the rest of Melbourne, shown by the blue line. Commodity prices weakened. Gold has benefited due to concerns about global money printing and the spread of COVID. It's taking a bit of a breather as money flows back to the US dollar. That's partly why the Australian dollar is below 69.5 US cents again. It's also a reflection of concerns about coronavirus. Which reminds me of this other little problem. We've had a recession, yet there are far fewer insolvencies than average. It's because there's a moratorium on the insolvent trading laws, which ends in September. Once October rolls around, the orange line will be well above the blue line as a whole lot of zombie companies go to the wall. And that's finance.
Some of Australia's leading netballers have taken aim at the sports administrators after a controversial rule change. Many are unhappy with the game's direction and want more of a say in its future. Patrick Galloway reports.
And flies that ball down the court to Bassett.
She doesn't go unnoticed on the court. Now Diamonds captain Caitlin Bassett is making her presence felt off it.
I think we've made ourselves pretty clear about how unhappy we are. I don't know about this one. Oh, she does!
Super Netball's decision to introduce a new 2-goal super shot weeks out from the season hasn't gone down well with players. For 5 minutes each quarter, goals will be worth double if shot from a set zone on the court. Many feel such a change shouldn't have been rushed through.
We've sat down as players recently and have come up with a manifesto about what it means to be a professional athlete, and I think that'll really be important to, what the game looks like for the next 50 or 100 years for us.
The lack of consultation was evident at one of Super Netball's most successful clubs of late, the Sunshine Coast Lightning.
I'll be very honest with you, complete shock. It came out of the blue.
Something as big as this, only 6 weeks out from the start, I think needed to be run by everyone.
Shooter Stephanie Wood is unsure how the Super Shot will change the game, although she does think it could create more dynamic players.
I do think that is a positive. Every time I coach younger girls, I tell them you don't want to just shoot from underneath the hoop.
While most are unsure exactly what impact the Super Shot will have, it certainly has got people talking about netball. This past week, Netball Australia announced the State of the Game review, designed to get input from all of the game's participants, including the players.
Going forward, we've made it very clear we want to be a part of this decision-making process, and we want that collaborative team approach like we do here with our clubs.
The season starts next month. Patrick Galloway, ABC News.
Geelong's Gary Rowan has escaped with a fine after being reported for rough conduct in last night's 27-point win over Brisbane at the SCG. Rowan's bump on Ryan Lester was deemed low impact. He wasn't sanctioned for high contact over this incident with Brandon Starcevic. The Lions led by 22 points in the second quarter. But Geelong replied with 9 consecutive goals to make it 3 wins in a row and move to second on the AFL ladder. A host of winter junior sport competitions have been cancelled in Victoria today due to the latest coronavirus restrictions. Football and netball leagues in the Essendon District, Eastern, Northern, South East and Western region were called off. League bosses say it was the only viable decision in the best interest of all clubs and the wider community. Earlier in the week, the present season of the statewide Victorian Junior Basketball League was cancelled. Now let's take a look at the weather. Overnight, it was quite cloudy across the state. There was patchy fog in parts of Victoria's West and South Gippsland. 1 for Mildura there, but Wilson's Prom only dropped to 10. Well, the clouds stuck around during the day. There were isolated showers across north central and northeastern areas this afternoon. And after that chilly start in Mildura, it hit 20 degrees today. In Melbourne, it dropped to 6 degrees early this morning, rising to 17 this afternoon, 15 down on the Surf Coast, and right now in Melbourne, sitting on 13 degrees. There's a lot of middle and high-level cloud over the southeast of Australia that you can see there. The Bureau says it's ahead of a low that will move over Victoria tomorrow, and wild weather is expected to form off Australia's east coast, affecting New South Wales on Sunday and into next week as well. Scattered showers tending widespread over Victoria's northeast tomorrow. Showers remaining isolated in East Gippsland and the far west of the state. Around the country tomorrow, a morning shower or two for Sydney, showers in Adelaide and sunny over in Perth. A cool to cold and mostly cloudy days on the way for Victoria with light winds, Ballarat and Colac heading for a top of just 11. Isolated thunderstorms and small hail mainly during the afternoon, then clearing the west at night. On the bays, winds will be northerly about 10 knots, becoming variable below 10 knots during the morning. Partly cloudy tonight in Melbourne with a slight chance of a shower later. Tomorrow's looking cloudy with possible morning fog, showers and the chance of a storm are expected in the afternoon and evening. Dropping to 9 overnight before a top of 14 degrees. And looking ahead, Sunday more showers, 7 to 13. Monday a shower or two and 16 the top. By Tuesday it should be partly cloudy and 15 degrees. And just recapping tonight's main news, Victoria has recorded 288 new coronavirus cases in the past 24 hours, with a warning that the worst may be yet to come. Police have issued 60 fines to people breaching renewed lockdown regulations, and 3 million masks are on the way, with the Premier urging all people in lockdown areas of metropolitan Melbourne and the Mitchell Shire to consider wearing a mask when out of the house and unable to maintain physical distancing of 1.5 metres. That is ABC News for this evening. Join me again tomorrow night. Bye for now.